In the shadows between history's pages, there are stories that refuse to die. Whispers of trains that vanished, files that were never meant to be read, and machines that should never have been built. They linger like radiation in the bones of a forgotten battlefield, unseen, but still burning. To follow their trail is to step into a labyrinth of silence, where every truth is guarded by the ghosts of those who swore it would never be spoken. On January 19, 1945, Königsberg was a city on the edge of collapse. Soviet artillery from the Third Belarusian Front thundered less than 30 kilometers away, and the streets were choked with refugees moving westward under freezing sleet. Amid this chaos, a black uniformed SS transport unit, operating under orders signed "Nur für den Führer," was seen loading unmarked wooden crates onto a Deutsche Reichsbahn train at the Hauptbahnhof. The train, known in internal rail logs as Sonderzug 77, was scheduled to depart at 23:40 for Palau, a Baltic port still under German control. Its escort detachment, drawn from the SS Technische Einsatzgruppe, carried weapons unusual for transport duty: MP-43 assault rifles, Flammenwerfer 41 units, and crates of ammunition marked Waffenamt Prof. Witness accounts, later collected in post-war Soviet military interrogations, described the cargo as unusually heavy, requiring 4 men per crate, with at least 2 boxes exuding a faint metallic ringing when handled. One surviving dockworker, Emil Haars, later told a Red Army officer that the men worked under dim red lamps and were ordered not to speak or smoke during the loading. The official Reichsbahn manifest for Sonderzug 77 lists industrial components bound for a repair depot in Danzig. Yet when Allied war crimes investigators reviewed the original transport papers in 1946, they noted that the signatures for the rail supervisor, the cargo inspector, and the security chief were all identical, each written in the same tight, angular script. Handwriting analysis conducted by British intelligence suggested that the author was SS Hauptsturmführer Otto Berthold, a logistics officer officially listed as killed in an air raid on Warsaw in October 1944. The train's documented route would have taken it southwest before turning north toward Palau. However, no surviving German or Soviet records confirm it reached that port. The only reference to its later movements comes from a decrypted Soviet cipher telegram dated January 23, 1945, sent from a Baltic Fleet observation post near Krantz. It reported electromagnetic interference consistent with proximity to industrial generators and unidentified rail noise in the vicinity, despite all known lines in that area having been destroyed by German demolition teams 2 weeks earlier. By February 1945, Königsberg had fallen, and Soviet NKVD units swept the port facilities at Palau for evidence of evacuated Nazi leadership or advanced weaponry. In the archives of the now-defunct Soviet Ministry of Media Machine Building, there exists a 2-page memorandum stamped Soversheno Sekretno, top secret, summarizing interviews with port workers. One man described seeing an entire train ferry loaded with heavy crates depart Palau under the cover of night, escorted by Kriegsmarine minesweepers. Destination: unknown. The Soviet memo ends abruptly with the notation, further information redacted by directive of Comrade Beria. In 1951, NATO intelligence initiated File KE 4311 to investigate persistent rumors of a missing German rail convoy transporting components of an experimental Wunderwaffe, possibly linked to late-war electromagnetic pulse research conducted at the Heeresversuchsanstalt Peenemünde. Among the file's contents is an aerial reconnaissance photo, taken by RAF PRU Spitfire in March 1945, showing a line of 12 covered freight cars on a siding near a frozen inlet west of Memel. This siding, according to post-war Lithuanian maps, did not exist after 1947, its rails torn up and the ground bulldozed flat. The trail seemed cold until 1978, when a former East German railway clerk defected to West Berlin. In his debriefing, he claimed that in 1953, Soviet military engineers quietly reconstructed a section of track in the Kaliningrad Oblast to remove sealed rail containers buried in a disused tunnel. The operation, he said, was carried out entirely at night, guarded by armed MVD troops, and concluded within 3 weeks. All workers were later reassigned to posts hundreds of kilometers away. Attempts to locate the original Königsberg departure logs today face an unusual obstacle. Every surviving ledger from the winter of 1945 in that sector has been partially rewritten in fountain pen, each amendment bearing dates inconsistent with the rest of the entries. Some pages have been crudely excised and replaced with blank paper before being rebound. According to Bundesarchiv cataloging notes, these irregularities affect only the weeks surrounding the Sonderzug 77 departure. No trace of the train's cargo has ever been confirmed. Theories range from dismantled radar array components and experimental turbine assemblies to nuclear research apparatus evacuated from the collapsing research station at Ohrdruf. An American intelligence assessment from 1947, now partially declassified, considered the possibility of electromechanical devices capable of radio frequency disruption over large geographic sectors being smuggled toward a neutral port for post-war escape. The fate of Sonderzug 77 remains officially unresolved. The last unverified sighting appears in the personal diary of an Estonian fisherman, Jonas Peets, whose 1945 entry mentions a great noise from inland and soldiers on the shore pointing toward the sea 1 week before the Soviets took Palau. His notebook was seized by Soviet authorities in 1946 and returned to his family in 1968, with that page torn out. For over 70 years, historians, archivists, and intelligence veterans have circled the same unanswered questions. Who signed those forged railway documents? What technology, if any, was hidden within those heavy crates? And why, decades after the war, do so many surviving files surrounding the Königsberg convoy still bear the telltale black ink rectangles of official redaction? On August 12, 1952, a Royal Air Force Canberra PR.3, flying a high-altitude reconnaissance sweep from Okinawa over the Soviet Far East, captured an image that should have been impossible. On a desolate, snow-dusted airstrip near the town of Komsomolsk-on-Amur, a single aircraft sat on the taxiway, its fuselage shape and swept-wing profile unmistakably matching the Messerschmitt P.1101, an experimental jet prototype abandoned in Bavaria in April 1945. The photograph, taken with a 36-inch focal-length camera, was returned to RAF Wyton for analysis. The P.1101 had been the subject of frantic Allied intelligence collection during the war. Only one complete airframe had been found, heavily damaged, at the Messerschmitt Oberammergau facility. According to U.S. Army Air Forces records, that airframe was dismantled and shipped to Wright Field in Ohio. How an operational example could appear in the Soviet Far East 7 years later became the subject of a covert investigation codenamed Operation Ash Relic. Within weeks, MI6 field officers in Tokyo obtained information from a Japanese fishing company operating in the Amur River basin. Workers claimed to have seen German men, tall, fair-haired, speaking a language they did not recognize, entering and leaving a restricted compound adjacent to the airfield. KGB internal transfers from the same period, later leaked to the West in the 1990s, confirmed the relocation of several German aeronautical engineers from facilities in Podberezhny to Komsomolsk in early 1947. Among the listed names was Dr. Karl-Heinz Gerstenberger, formerly of Messerschmitt's Advanced Design Bureau. Declassified fragments of the Ash Relic file reveal that MI6 passed the reconnaissance photo to the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence. A joint assessment concluded that the photographed aircraft was not only a P.1101 derivative but had modifications, altered intake geometry and extended fuselage, suggesting continued development beyond the German design. The assessment speculated that the Soviets were attempting to adapt the airframe to new turbojet models produced under license from British Rolls-Royce Nene engines, which Moscow had acquired in 1946. The investigation's paper trail breaks abruptly in mid-1953. The last surviving internal memo, heavily redacted, refers to direct interference from higher political authority, and orders the file to be held under indefinite security classification. When the British National Archives released partial holdings in the 1990s, every photograph beyond the initial August 1952 image had been removed. Rumors persisted through the Cold War. In September 1962, just weeks before the Cuban Missile Crisis, a retired CIA photo interpreter named William Hargrove reportedly identified the same unusual aircraft silhouette in U-2 imagery of San Antonio de los Baños Air Base in Cuba. The claim was dismissed by his superiors as a misinterpretation of shadowed MiG-19s, but Hargrove maintained until his death in 1987 that the proportions were not of any Soviet production fighter known to the period. Archival researchers later uncovered a parallel Soviet designation, Izdali 34KH, in the personal notes of an engineer at the Novosibirsk Aircraft Production Association. The notes, dated 1954, describe a swept-wing, variable incidence prototype of German origin, reworked for indigenous power plants. No known Soviet aircraft fits this exact description. The CIA's own Index of Foreign Aeronautical Acquisitions lists a single entry for captured German jet prototype, status, unresolved, under the section for 1945 to 1955. No other details accompany the line item. FOIA requests in the 2000s produced only a standard denial citing national defense concerns. In 1975, the British journalist Simon Kershaw interviewed a defector from the Soviet aviation industry, identified only as Engineer M. According to Kershaw's notes, M claimed that the aircraft in question had been stored in a camouflaged hangar near Komsomolsk until the late 1950s, when it was disassembled and shipped in crates to an undisclosed location. The movement order bore the personal approval signature of Marshal Rodion Malinovsky, then Soviet Minister of Defense. No physical wreckage, blueprints, or serial numbers have ever surfaced to confirm the existence of the second P.1101. The RAF's original August 1952 reconnaissance negative is still classified. Only a poor quality print survives in an annex to the Ash relic papers. The coordinates of the photographed airstrip correspond today to an overgrown field on the edge of a civilian housing development. The runway has been stripped for scrap, and no official Soviet or Russian records acknowledge that military aircraft ever operated there. To this day, aerospace historians debate whether the photograph showed a surviving German airframe spirited east under Stalin's orders, or a Soviet-built derivative created from captured plans. What remains undisputed is that something matching no known Soviet design was seen taxiing across frozen tarmac in the Far East, and that the governments who saw it chose to erase its trail almost entirely. On February 9, 1945, the German submarine U-864, a Type IXD-2, was en route from Kiel to Japan on a mission codenamed Operation Caesar. Its manifest, revealed only decades later through fragmentary Kriegsmarine dispatches, included mercury flasks for munitions production, advanced aircraft components, and technical blueprints intended for the Imperial Japanese Navy. Intercepted and hunted by HMS Venturer, U-864 became the only submarine in history to be sunk by another submarine while both were submerged, settling in 150 meters of water off Fedje, Norway. The wreck lay undisturbed for nearly 60 years. In 2003, a Norwegian coastal survey team mapping the seabed for environmental risk assessment detected an elongated metallic anomaly buried beneath sediment near the main hull. Divers from the Royal Norwegian Navy's clearance unit descended in December 2004 to examine the site. What they recovered, at least according to two of the divers interviewed off-record, was not part of the submarine itself. From their account, a lead-lined steel container, approximately 80 centimeters long and weighing over 70 kilograms, was wedged beneath debris from the forward torpedo compartment. Its surface bore no German manufacturing marks, only faint stenciling in Japanese katakana script. The divers were ordered not to log the object in their recovery notes. Instead, it was hoisted to the surface under a tarpaulin and transferred immediately to the deck of a waiting U.S. Navy salvage vessel, the USNS Grasp, which had arrived unannounced 2 days earlier. Officially, the Norwegian Coastal Administration's report on the 2004 dive makes no mention of the container. The public record describes only mercury leakage and contamination risks. Yet internal memos between the Norwegian Ministry of Defense and the U.S. Naval Sea Systems Command, leaked in 2010, refer cryptically to foreign origin isotopic material of unknown stability being received at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in New Hampshire in January 2005. One page in the U.S. Archive, dated March 17, 1945, may provide a clue. Labeled Memo, Manhattan Engineer District, New York, it discusses reception of non-domestic isotopic anomalies via North Atlantic maritime intercept. The timing and description match no known Allied seizure of Axis cargo. That memo is stamped Destroy after reading, yet survived in microfilm misfiled among unrelated procurement papers. In 2008, one of the Norwegian divers, terminally ill with cancer, gave a deathbed interview to a local journalist. He claimed the container had been warm to the touch, underwater, and emitted a steady vibration, like a heartbeat. His last words before losing consciousness were, "It pulsed." No scientific analysis of such an object has ever been released. Norwegian authorities, under pressure from environmental groups, announced plans to encase U-864 in a concrete sarcophagus to prevent further mercury leakage. That decision effectively ended any further sanctioned dives to the wreck. The U.S. Navy has never acknowledged involvement with the recovery operation. Attempts by researchers to obtain shipping manifests, customs entries, or receiving reports from Portsmouth for January 2005 have been met with blanket FOIA exemptions citing classified nuclear technology. The Norwegian Ministry of Defense insists that no items other than environmental hazards were removed from the site. Privately, several marine salvage specialists who have worked on Cold War-era operations point out that a lead-lined container of that size and mass is consistent with shielding for radiological materials, but also note that its apparent Japanese markings complicate the assumption that it originated in Germany. This has led some historians to suggest that U-864 may have been transporting elements of a Japanese nuclear program that had received assistance from German engineers in 1944. No direct documentary evidence confirms the container's contents or ultimate fate. The only traceable chain of custody is the brief moment when it left the seabed under armed guard, passed into the hands of a foreign navy, and vanished into a sealed transport crate on the deck of the USNS Grasp. The U-864 wreck today lies under layers of concrete and sediment, officially quarantined for ecological safety. Unofficially, it remains the starting point for a chain of unanswered questions about what technology or material warranted such secrecy, and why the paper trail surrounding it has been so meticulously erased. On May 1, 1945, with the Third Reich in its death throes, an SS transport column rolled out of Lübeck under the command of Obersturmbannführer Erich Wessler. Its mission, according to fragmentary Allied intercepts, was the evacuation of Arkivstell Nord, a warehouse on the outskirts of the city containing captured Allied documents, diplomatic codes, and intelligence summaries taken from operations in Sweden, Spain, Portugal, and Switzerland. The warehouse, a commandeered grain depot, had been under the jurisdiction of the Reichssicherheitsamt's Foreign Intelligence Branch, AMT-6. Contemporary OSS cables suggest that the documents inside included not only raw intelligence but reports detailing covert Allied dealings in ostensibly neutral countries. Information that, if revealed, could fracture the fragile political landscape of the post-war period. The Lübeck facility had been identified as a target for capture, but the rapid advance of British forces into Schleswig-Holstein forced the SS to act first. The convoy, consisting of 6 covered Opel Blitz trucks and 2 armored SD. KFZ 251 half-tracks, was last seen heading southeast along the Elbe-Lübeck Canal under a light rain. A British reconnaissance flight at 14:20 hours reported motor transport under camouflage netting, parked in a tree line north of Malm, but no subsequent ground unit encountered the column. The official British after-action report from the area notes only civilians, sporadic sniper fire, no significant contact. Post-war, the trail is almost non-existent. The Lübeck municipal transport records for late April and early May 1945 have been heavily altered, with entire ledger pages retyped on mismatched paper. Surviving SS personnel captured in the region uniformly denied knowledge of the archive's evacuation, though interrogation notes reveal they were all asked identical leading questions about document freight bound for Flensburg. The only tangible resurfacing of the archive came 23 years later. In April 1968, British Trade Attaché Gerald Sims, stationed in Buenos Aires, mailed an unmarked envelope to an address in London associated with a retired SIS archivist. The envelope contained a single item, a browned, brittle inventory sheet listing document box numbers and brief descriptions. At the top of the sheet was the faded stamp of Arkivstell Nord. 5 entries were listed under a section headed Sonderbestand A, each followed by a code name: Velour, Eider, Granite, Mistral, and Palladium. None of these names corresponded to any known Allied or Axis operation. Sims disappeared on April 14, 1968, while traveling by taxi to the British Embassy. Argentine police records note that the driver dropped him at an intersection in the San Telmo district. No witnesses saw him after that point. His personal effects, including diplomatic identification, were recovered from his hotel room. The envelope's London recipient died in 1971 without ever speaking publicly about it. In 1989, an internal Foreign Office security review declassified a small number of 1,945 telegrams. Among them was a transmission from the OSS London station to Washington dated May 2, 1945, which read in part, "If Lübeck convoy recaptured intact, recommend immediate suppression of contents to avoid diplomatic incident with redacted." The rest of the cable remains blacked out. Speculation among historians has ranged from files on Allied negotiations with Francoist Spain, to secret trade in strategic materials through Swedish intermediaries, to documentation of Allied intelligence operations within the Vatican. The codenames on the recovered sheet remain unexplained, though one former SIS officer suggested they were not operations, but rather categories, possibly for classification by political sensitivity. In Lübeck itself, the original warehouse site was demolished in 1952 and replaced with a housing complex. No photographic record of its interior survives. Local residents interviewed in the 1970s recalled only that the building was heavily guarded in the final months of the war and that trucks often left at night, driving without headlights. The Lübeck archive convoy's fate is an unresolved fragment of the war's final hours, a disappearance where the absence of evidence has been matched only by the deliberate quiet that has surrounded it ever since. In late August 1961, the Soviet oceanographic survey vessel Vitязь conducted a deep-sea mapping expedition in the Barents Sea under the cover of hydrographic research. The mission logs, preserved in the Russian State Naval Archive until their abrupt reclassification in 1994, show that the survey team recorded an anomaly at coordinates 74 degrees 19 minutes north, 33 degrees 51 minutes east, a 90-meter metallic structure buried beneath approximately 20 meters of silt on the seabed. Classified KGB memoranda, later leaked during the 1990s, linked the anomaly to Project Eisenfaust, Iron Fist, a late-war German engineering program allegedly intended to develop fixed undersea launch platforms for V-2 derivatives capable of striking the eastern seaboard of the United States. According to surviving fragments of Soviet military-industrial correspondence, Eisenfaust's development was centered at a Kriegsmarine testing facility near Kiel and was never completed due to material shortages and the Allied bombing campaign. The Barents coordinates, however, suggested that at least one installation may have been secretly deployed. Soviet naval intelligence dispatched a small diving team from the Northern Fleet's 42nd Special Purpose Detachment to investigate. The divers' report, referenced but not included in the surviving files, apparently noted unnatural right-angled forms and intact access hatches, but their mission was aborted after only 14 minutes on the site due to equipment malfunction and strong magnetic disturbances. Western intelligence services became aware of the anomaly through Norwegian fishing trawler reports in 1962 and 1963. Crews complained of magnetic compass deviations of up to 25 degrees and intermittent sonar echoes resembling a vertical wall beneath their nets. The Norwegian defense staff forwarded these reports to NATO's standing group in Brussels, but no follow-up surveys were authorized at the time. By the mid-1970s, Soviet interest appeared to wane. The anomaly was quietly omitted from updated hydrographic charts issued to civilian vessels in 1978, though an internal Soviet Navy chart from 1980 still marked the coordinates with a red triangle labeled Zone Ogren. No entry. When the Norwegian mapping ship Königsberg attempted to conduct a side-scan sonar pass over the area in 1981, it was shadowed by a Soviet frigate and ordered to change course for reasons of safety. The final known Soviet inspection occurred in 1983, when a three-man diving team was deployed from the salvage ship Alagés. Only one diver, Petty Officer 2nd Class Viktor Romashev, surfaced under his own power. The other two were hauled up unconscious. Romashev himself suffered acute decompression sickness and severe disorientation, repeatedly telling medical staff that he could not remember entering the water. His debriefing transcript, preserved in part within a Northern Fleet medical file, contains only fragmented statements, lights, not hours, inside. After 1983, the anomaly vanished from all subsequent Soviet naval charts, military or civilian. The coordinates were reassigned on paper to a fictitious rocky shoal, a tactic often used to mask strategic sites. The WWII's original 1961 survey data was removed from public archives, replaced with a gap labeled "No measurements recorded." In the post-Cold War period, a handful of Western researchers attempted to revisit the site. In 1997, a joint Norwegian-British dive expedition applied for clearance to conduct an ROV survey of the coordinates. The request was denied by Russian authorities on the grounds that the area was an active military exercise zone. When the expedition attempted an unannounced approach from international waters, they were intercepted by a Russian border guard patrol vessel before deploying any equipment. Theories about the Barents Sea Anomaly vary. Some maritime historians believe it may be nothing more than a scuttled wartime depot ship whose superstructure mimicked right angles on sonar. Others argue that the scale, magnetic disturbances, and Soviet secrecy point to a purpose-built installation, perhaps part of a German plan to establish an Arctic supply or weapons platform, later seized and studied in complete isolation by the USSR. No photographs, video footage, or physical samples from the site have ever surfaced publicly. The only enduring evidence is a short entry in the WWII's 1961 mission log, penciled in the margin by an unknown hand. Structure at depth. Not natural. Orders to seal file. The deeper you dig, the colder the air becomes. Footsteps echo in corridors where no one walks, and the paper in your hands feels heavier than its weight. You realize too late that some doors close from the inside, and once they do, the light outside is gone. What remains is a truth so dark that to name it would be to carry it forever, and to be carried by it into the dark.